Welcome to UK Properties News. If you are a homeowner, a retiree trying to make your pension stretch further, or someone who simply wants to understand what on earth is going on with housing in this country, then this is the most important property video you will watch this year. What I'm about to share with you today is not just another piece of industry news. This is a genuine alarm bell, and it affects every single person in the United Kingdom who owns a home, rents a home, or hopes to one day secure a roof over their head. I want you to stay right until the end of this video, because the final part of what I have to say could genuinely change the way you think about your own property situation, especially if you are approaching retirement or already living on a fixed income. Over the past 18 months, something deeply troubling has been unfolding across the British construction industry. We have watched builder after builder collapse. Not small one-man band outfits working on loft conversions, but major construction companies employing hundreds and sometimes thousands of workers. Firms that had survived the 2008 financial crash, that had weathered the uncertainty of Brexit, that had kept going through the chaos of the pandemic, these companies are now falling like dominoes. Henry Construction gone, Buckingham Group gone, Talent Construction gone, ISG, one of the largest fit-out contractors in the whole of Europe, gone, and these are just the names that made the headlines. Behind every one of those big failures, there are dozens of smaller firms, subcontractors, family businesses that have quietly closed their doors with barely a mention in the local press, let alone the national news. Now, before I go any further, I want to ask you something. If you find this channel helpful, if this kind of honest, no-nonsense analysis of the UK property market is the sort of thing you need to hear, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button right now. I am building this channel to serve people exactly like you. People who deserve clear, straightforward information about what is happening to housing in this country. I am not backed by any big corporation or property company. I rely entirely on your support to keep going. So please subscribe, tap the bell icon so you never miss an update, and if you find value in this video, share it with a friend or family member who needs to hear it. That one small action makes an enormous difference to me, and I am genuinely grateful for every single one of you who takes that step. Right, let me get into the real substance of what is happening and why it matters so much, particularly if you are a senior or a retiree in this country. The official insolvency figures tell a story that is frankly shocking. More than 4,000 construction firms went insolvent in the past 12 months alone. That works out at more than 10 construction businesses failing every single day. These are the highest failure rates since records began being kept in this format. The very industry that is supposed to be solving our housing crisis is itself in the deepest crisis it has ever faced. And what worries me most is that the situation beneath the surface is even worse than these numbers suggest, because many of the firms that are still technically operating are barely hanging on, running on fumes, praying for conditions to improve before their cash runs out. So what has caused this catastrophe? The answer is a perfect storm of pressures that have all arrived at the worst possible moment. The single biggest killer has been the dramatic rise in interest rates. Construction is a business that runs on borrowed money. Builders borrow to buy land. They borrow to pay for materials and wages during the months or years it takes to complete a project. They borrow to bridge the gap between spending money on construction and eventually receiving money when the finished homes are sold. For over a decade, from 2009 right through to 2021, borrowing was essentially free. Interest rates were at historic lows. A builder could take out millions in development finance and barely notice the interest charges on the balance sheet. Margins were thin, but it did not matter because financing costs were almost nothing. Then the Bank of England raised interest rates 14 times in less than 2 years. Development finance that used to cost 2 or 3% suddenly jumped to 8, 9, even 10%. Think about what that means in real terms. A medium-sized builder carrying £10 million of development finance might have been paying £200,000 a year in interest. Overnight, that same debt started costing £800,000 or more. That is an extra £600,000 a year that has to come from somewhere. For builders operating on profit margins of just 5 to 10%, that additional cost did not just eat into their profits, it obliterated them entirely and pushed them straight into losses. They were locked into fixed-price contracts that had been agreed when borrowing was cheap, but now they were servicing debt at rates that made those contracts completely unprofitable. There was no escape clause, no way to renegotiate, no way to pass the cost on. They simply had to absorb it until they could absorb no more. But interest rates are only one part of the story. Material costs have been on an extraordinary and painful journey. During the pandemic and its aftermath, the cost of basic construction materials rose by 30 to 50%. Timber prices doubled, steel surged, concrete became significantly more expensive. Insulation, which is now needed in greater quantities than ever before because of tightened building regulations around energy efficiency, shot up in price. Many of these increases have never fully reversed. Builders who quoted for projects back in 2021 or 2022 based on material costs at that time found themselves actually purchasing those materials months or years later at vastly higher prices. The revenue from the project was locked in at the old figure, but the costs kept climbing. Every project completed under those conditions meant taking a loss. Some builders discovered they were effectively paying their customers for the privilege of building their homes. Then there is the labour crisis. The construction workforce has been shrinking for years. Brexit removed a significant number of skilled workers who came from European countries and returned home. The pandemic prompted many older tradespeople to take early retirement. Young people have simply not been entering the construction trades in anything like the numbers needed to replace those who have left. The result is fierce competition for skilled workers. Electricians, plumbers, bricklayers, roofers, they can all command substantial pay premiums because there are not enough of them to go around. Labour costs have risen by 20 to 40% in many trades. For an industry where labour typically makes up 30 to 40% of total project costs, these increases are devastating. When you add rising material costs and soaring finance charges on top, many builders found their entire cost base had jumped by 40 to 60% while their contracted revenues stayed exactly where they were. Now here is where this story becomes directly and deeply relevant to anyone who is retired or approaching retirement in the UK. When interest rates went up, they did not just punish builders, they punished every potential buyer of a new home. Mortgage rates leapt from around 2% to 5 or even 6%. The purchasing power of ordinary households fell by 25 to 30% almost overnight. A family that could previously afford a £300,000 home suddenly found they could only stretch to $220,000. Demand for new build properties collapsed. Show home visits dried up. Off-plan sales vanished. Builders were completing homes that nobody could afford to buy. Cash stopped flowing in, but costs kept flowing out. For smaller builders without deep reserves, this combination was fatal. For seniors specifically, this matters enormously. If you are a retiree who owns your home and you are counting on the value of that property as part of your retirement security, then a weakened construction industry might seem like good news at first glance because fewer new homes means less competition and potentially higher prices for existing properties. But that is only half the story. A shortage of new homes puts enormous strain on the entire housing market. It makes it harder to downsize, which is something many retirees want to do to release equity and reduce their living costs. It makes the rental market tighter and more expensive, which affects retirees who rent. It slows down property chains, making it harder to sell and move when you need to. And if you were considering equity release or selling your property to fund your care needs, an unpredictable and constrained market makes every decision more difficult and more stressful. The major house builders, the big publicly listed companies, have survived this storm, but only by dramatically scaling back. Housing starts have fallen by 40% or more. Land purchases have slowed to a trickle. These large firms had the balance sheets and the financial reserves to hunker down, cut dividends, and wait for better days. But smaller and medium-sized builders did not have that luxury. They needed constant cash flow just to keep the lights on. When the work dried up and the costs kept rising, they simply ran out of road. The subcontractor market has been particularly devastated. When a main contractor goes bust, the subcontractors who did the actual work often go completely unpaid for jobs they have already finished. One large failure can trigger a cascade of smaller failures as unpaid subcontractors find themselves unable to pay their own suppliers and their own workers. Skills are leaving the industry and they are not coming back quickly. The capacity to build homes in this country is being permanently damaged. What makes this situation genuinely worse than the 2008 crisis is that last time, when demand collapsed, costs also fell. Land became cheaper, materials came down in price, and workers were available and affordable. When the market recovered, the industry could bounce back relatively quickly. This time is fundamentally different. Costs have risen and they are staying high. Material prices are not returning to pre-pandemic levels. Labour shortages are structural, driven by demographics and years of underinvestment in training, not by a temporary downturn. The regulatory burden has increased enormously, with more demanding building regulations, biodiversity requirements, nutrient neutrality rules, and a planning system that has become slower and more expensive to navigate. Even when demand eventually returns, builders will face a permanently higher cost base that will make recovery much slower and much harder. The government's response has been largely inadequate. Housing targets have been announced and revised. Concerns have been expressed, but nothing meaningful has been done to address the fundamental problems. The planning system remains dysfunctional. Environmental regulations continue to block development in large parts of the country. Building costs continue to rise. Interest rates remain elevated. The gap between what builders need to charge to make a profit and what buyers can actually afford to pay remains stubbornly wide. Until that gap closes, the crisis will continue, and there is very little sign that policymakers understand the urgency of the situation or are willing to take the bold action that is needed. For anyone who is retired or nearing retirement, my honest advice is this: pay close attention to what is happening in your local housing market. If you are thinking about selling, downsizing, or releasing equity from your property, do your research thoroughly and get professional advice from someone who understands the current conditions. If you have reserved a new build property with a smaller builder, check their financial stability very carefully. Builder failures leave buyers in limbo, with deposits at risk and completion dates disappearing into uncertainty. Make sure you understand the warranty and protection arrangements on any new build purchase. And above all, do not make major financial decisions based on assumptions about property values that may no longer hold true in this changed environment. I know this is a lot to take in, and I know it can feel overwhelming, especially when you are trying to manage your finances carefully during retirement. But knowledge is genuinely power in situations like this. The more you understand about what is really happening in the property market, the better equipped you are to protect yourself and make good decisions. That is exactly why I make these videos, to cut through the noise, ignore the hype, and give you the honest, clear-eyed analysis you deserve. If this video has helped you, please do subscribe to UK Properties News right now, hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and leave me a comment below telling me what property topics you would like me to cover next. Every subscription, every comment, every share helps this channel grow and helps me keep bringing you the information that actually matters. Thank you so much for watching. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I will see you in the next one.